Well, it's a funny evening here as I get ready to do Jonathan's Telecaster, USA Telecaster. We'll come back to that in a minute. Just the reason it's an odd evening for me is I discovered yesterday only that the owner of the site, Mr. Roger, who very kindly gave me this fabulous deal on a rundown, but for me perfect little space, died at the weekend, and so yeah, it's just one of those weird things. He was very, I don't know how to describe him in a way. He wasn't well. He'd lived a long life and had lots of kind of ailments, but he's a kind of a serial entrepreneur, and he built this up, and the story of how he built this up from being a pig farmer in the 80s, and then swine flu and foot and trotter or something, and find out that the health animal people came and killed all his animals and gave him a big payout. And then apparently he set up this recycling centre and ended up doing all of West Devon's recycling and so on and so on. And but he was brilliant opportunist. There's so many things that he'd seized on to do. So for example, just one example, I come in here on maybe a spring or summer evening, and out there lined up, instead of all the lorries, out there will be lined up hundreds of VW camper vans with little tents and people staying overnight. And he just has become a venue for people to stay. He's got the space, why not let people stay? And then those nights tend to have, somewhere in this whole massive complex of big buildings, there'll be some live music thumping, and there's an entire, I don't know, almost American style dusk till dawn thing going on just out of sight somewhere, with all these bikers and coming in, and you'll see them coming in through that gateway on those summer nights, and you just think, how the hell did he organise that, and who did he organise that with? But he did, and so he never missed a trick. And he was a gent of the old tradition, really. And it seems strange that he's gone, but it's also a little bit unsettling anyway, because of course at his age I worried from as soon as I got in here, really I worried that perhaps this couldn't go on forever. And the low rent here and the suitability of this little spot for me is great, because it makes it viable. But it's not necessarily, if somebody comes in or buys up the business and takes over, and a new management tries to do different things, well, you may have to look for somewhere else. So all that kind of thing when you're 60 feels unsettling, but it's real life, and if things have to change, they have to change. But it may be that his wife continues to let the whole management staff here run it, and perhaps it makes sense that it just carries on running. So I might be lucky. The running of this place might yet outlive me. Touch wood. No, the other way around. Anyway, so it's not morbid exactly, or somber, but it's so long, Roger. Thanks for giving me the in on this little place when I really needed it in a difficult time. So I really appreciate that. And we've lost a colourful character and a serial entrepreneur, that's for sure. Of the old school, I would say. I'm one of your people in suits types, or your Dragon's Den type. This is an old type that seals deals with a handshake, and that's that. So here we have Jonathan's USA Player Tele, and nice guitar all round, with the usual small caveats. So lovely full thickness body, strings through, wobbly old style cup there, which needs tightening. The usual good quality Fender tuners, not wrong about that. Oh sorry, I thought this was USA. No, this is Mexico. But it has as a downside, we'll change the tree there. wants to keep the original nut, we might need to do a little bit of adjustment to it just to free it up. But we have that sort of, oh yes, we've seen this before. See how the light reflects either side of the fret there? That's your sprayed over paint, finish sprayed over the frets job. And actually on this one, you can actually see, if I zoom up, you really can see, I think there's a bit of tarnishing, but I think some of it might, actually it's only tarnishing. But there is, as always, there's a bit of fret, a bit of the old finish climbing up the frets. But it's mostly tarnished up here. Now it's got a similar play pattern actually as the Strat, which is no surprise since both play by the same person. So it may not have been leveled in the factory. It may be this is how it wears when Jonathan plays, and that's fine. So it has some not major problems with the frets actually, but it has a little bit of choke out on the high E bend around this area. Certainly the 14th bending up, and I've got a few little notes on here that I found at home today. So choking out here, and hopefully with that, well, I know that with a bit of leveling, careful leveling will alleviate that. Who's that there? Is that my neighbor? Is that my neighbor? He says looking downwards. Nope, nope, nope. Okay. Yes. I changed put a new one of these on because that was falling off. It'd become worn. So there's the original there. There was a question that Jonathan asked me to look out for, that he had thought one of these screws here was slipping, and not moving the block where it needed to. So I've done some tests on it, and it seems to be working fine for me, and that's good. So really, this is going to be fairly straightforward. At fret level, I've set the action at home. We'll double check the relief. We'll take care of the nut slots, just widen them a tiny bit, change the tree, which is over there, and then we'll we'll do the leveling and restring with 10. So touch wood, I hope to say, a pretty straightforward one. That's what I hope. And I hope my phone will not run out of memory. So I've set the action low down here on the saddles. I've set it, I've checked the relief, and I'll check it again, but the relief is pretty low, and I'm kind of happy with where that is. If people want to know, it's a tiny bit more than none. I think I'll do the action down here at the nut now, since I've got the relief in the neck and I've got the what I call the last fret action. And the reason I call it the last fret action is because it's just my way of describing it. I prefer that, sorry, I'm looking out to see who's out there. I prefer that than using the 12th fret, and that's just a personal thing. I know other people, historically, people do it the other way. Forgive me for doing it the way I enjoy. I had another one of those comment people on Facebook, on YouTube, saying I couldn't watch any more, I couldn't afford to give any more of my life away, which is a funny sort of statement. You know, it just always cracks me up. You're welcome to, not like my length of presentation or my mumbling or whatever it is you think. You may have come for a bit of very quick and snappy information. That's totally fine. But consider that there's absolutely no reason to be snotty or shitty about it, right? There's absolutely no reason, and it doesn't do the world or you any good to do it. It doesn't really bother me that much anymore, so I just tend to reply and point out that, my channel, as I've said to people loads of times, my channel is doing exactly what I wanted it or needed it to do. So I have no interest in changing it, making it snappier or sexier for anybody when it works perfectly. And in case, I know if you've heard me say this before, you'll have heard me say it before, but in case anybody was kind of interested and wondering, in terms of, ever thinking about doing your own YouTube stuff, I don't do this channel for money from advertising. I do it for one focused, clear reason, and it pays me off in that reason. It works perfectly. So the reason I do it, and what it's meant to do for me, is I do it as a way of pre-qualifying or qualifying prospective customers for Reloved guitars. Okay, so if you come on this site and a page, a channel, and you're looking for fast, sharply edited, fast, snappy videos, then obviously you come to the wrong place, because that's not what I do. And that's usually, and in fact it always shows or goes to mean that you're not my target market, which is absolutely fine. There's no reason why you should be or have to be. So on the contrary, or by contrast, the people who are my target market tend to like the format and how I present it, because they're looking for something different. They're not looking to be given information, fast information that they can go straight off and put into practice. So they're usually looking for somebody who sets up the kind of guitar they've got, and they want to see what's involved. And very often, when they've watched my stuff, if someone is my target market, they either, well, let's put it this way, they either decide that they don't like my approach and style, in which case that's absolutely fine. The world is full of people whose style and approach might suit them, but a percentage of people who watch come away from watching with a sense that they do like what I do, and to them they'd be happy to send me their guitar, or they want to send me their guitar. And in marketing terms or business terms, to be able to pre-qualify somebody, or qualify somebody, I'm using a tautological expression, to qualify somebody for your business as being a part of your target market, who likely wants, who would like your service and can afford your service, and who cares about the way you do it, which is what I spend time showing, that then basically qualifies those people as being the kind of people I want to sell my service to. And so when that person contacts me, that's great, because we don't have to haggle over anything or have long explanatory discussions. People get what I do, and they straight away, the only question those people ever ask me is, can you fit me in when? Not how much, or can you sell to me why it would be good for me. It's just, when can you fit me in? And that's a fantastic qualification for a business, and it's priceless really for any business. So this one is exactly on the right level anyway. I just want to use the file to just, if I can, just widen it a little bit without lowering it. That's the aim. Okay, so anyway, that as usual went on a bit longer than I intended to, but it's just it is funny, when people do that, and I just try and say, everything's working perfectly, and it's perfectly fine that it's not for you, but pop along and find something that is for you, in the nicest of terms, and and don't waste your time trying to score a point or something. It's just bloody stupid. It really is pointless, scoring points. So you never know. Maybe people get that. The person then made a comment afterwards that I couldn't really work out whether they'd understood my point and accepted, you know, that I'd given it in a respectful spirit, which I always do my utmost to do. This is just a little bit more on the A. Yeah, so, but yeah, I never started this to make money from advertising, which is in a lot of ways a very common thing, and I didn't do it that way because I'm very aware of the vicissitudes, or the capriciousness of Google's, YouTube's algorithm, or its changing rules, and what it decides is important today versus not important tomorrow. And so I just set out to make it bring where did that go? Has this got a hole in the bag too? It has. How come I keep getting these holes with bags in? No, the other way round. Bags with holes. Anyway, yeah, so the marketing thing, the thing works for me perfectly as a marketing tool. And of course people don't necessarily know that, so I like to try and explain it whilst being as polite as possible and respectful, which can be a challenge when the person who's left the comment hasn't done it in the same spirit. They seem to have done it in a, yeah, your videos are rubbish, yeah, there's people better than you. See that joke? So we've got a problem area. I bet you this will turn out to be a little bit low compared to everything else. Anyway, so that aside, it isn't meant to be entertaining, which is why I don't come up with clever videos, about, I don't know, giveaways, or particular famous guitars, or I'm not really making that kind of content. I'm documenting and giving some assurance to the people who trust me with their guitars, so that they can see what I do with them and understand why I've done what I've done. And that's the first purpose of it. I can see gaps on here where the finish, this carpet of finish, has started not peeling back, but it's where the raw edges are, and it looks dangerous, vulnerable, which is why I hate the way that Mexico and USA finish their maple boards like this. The fact they spray over the frets. So as soon as they've taken the or radiused them in a little bit, or scraped them in the factory to get rid of the finish right on top of the fret, and maybe they don't even do that. I haven't bought one new, so maybe this comes with the crunchy stuff on. I don't know. But either which way, I've got some marker on the fret there, on the wood, which I'll have to take off afterwards. But however they do it, it comes, it ends up being cut as they polish the frets, or as playing polishes the frets, whether it's the factory or the player. And in cutting it, it means it's vulnerable to breaking, and lots of people have found this to be the case, not just me. And it's doubly and trebly bad as well when you come to refret, because you're just pulling up the frets out of this already broken carpet of finish, and it just trashes the edges even further. It's almost impossible to get them out without that happening. And if you don't want to give a customer back a scrappy looking thing, you have to basically refinish the front fingerboard. But then you can only, you have to, obviously if you're refretting, you can then sand it back to wood and refinish, but that puts the price up considerably. So not good. And Squier, with their classic vibes and vintage modifieds and affinities, Indonesian and Chinese stuff, they don't do it that way. They seem to finish the board first and then buff it up, and then they seem to put on the frets then, which makes what seems to be a much more stable surface. First of all, it's a more level surface for the frets, but it's also more stable. Hello, little moth. More stable anyway, generally, for when you come to refret, it doesn't pull the whole thing apart, or the whole thing doesn't fall apart. Okay, so now has come the time for the precision fret leveling. Now, I'm going to get out my ancient tried and tested and tried little bits, which have worked very well. Now, I have to say the frets on this are not tall to begin with. They're quite worn. I don't suppose they were tall from the factory, and they're certainly not tall now. So it's a bit nerve-wracking when they're low like that, because they're already, I have to be honest, they're already a tiny bit lower than I would personally like them for playing, but that's a preference, and I know obviously Jonathan will be used to this guitar and it will feel familiar to him, so you know, I can't let my personal preference, mind you, little beautiful little moth, I shouldn't let my personal preference get in the way. But it means that as I start off with this, with limited fret metal, as far as I'm concerned, I'm very cautious. We've got grooves, fret grooves here, that I'm not even going to try and take out deliberately. If any of those improve because of the fret leveling, then good, but I'm not going to go after it for its own sake, because it's not a fair exchange of fret metal for a cosmetic improvement, really. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go after it from the point of view of leveling, getting it as level as I can, as needs to be for the action we've chosen. And partly why I'm doing this, there aren't any choked off individual frets here right now on this neck, but what I'm really doing now is a diagnostic leveling, and it does show up that these are lower here, and there's a bit of a low spot, but we'll see how it develops. The issue on this guitar will be some unevenness in the G track, which is where we bend into when we bend notes on a neck, usually from the E, and we bend across into the G like that. So that's basically, that's choking out on this fret here, which, as you see, if I move those and keep the pick there, that actually is pointing at this spot on the G track. So what I want is all of these to play cleanly. That's a little tiny, it's okay, but it might be a tiny bit low there. It's only barely touching with the paper, so I'm going to do a little bit more on there, but really the difference will come into play as we go across into the G track. Now the reason why this is, you get these little strange bits of areas of low and high frets that upset the playability, is because that's where our low ones are, exactly as where I'd expect, bending on the 14th. Yeah, the reason we get the different the hills and valleys is because the neck never describes a perfect curve under load, because it seems that the neck bunches very slightly under load, so creates a few little wrinkles. And the nice thing about this method of leveling is it very quickly highlights where those wrinkles are, and it usually, where we have a little choke out on the bends like that, it'll usually be because there's either we're bending from a low spot or we're bending across into a very, very slightly high spot, and I can't really see it doesn't look like a low spot particularly at the moment, so I suspect that it might actually be, oh no, it's 14 is a low fret at this point. Actually 12 is very low, but only at this point, so it's been flattened somewhere in the middle, and so is 15. So 12, 14 and 15, funnily enough, 13 is quite high, or put another way, it's cutting along with all the others, equal with all the others. We've got a relatively high spot here. We've got a low fret there currently, and we've got 2 low frets there, and a low one after that. So that's causing the choke out, but that's positive because I can be pretty confident now that as we get across into the G track, because that tells me that we'll be able to free it up. Right, now we're going to recalibrate for the G track, and this is the sort of the money leveling shot at this point. It would be the sort of bit that clears up the bends that we want cleared up for the low action that we've set, and after that the next bit is the taking away any fret slap on the fatter wound strings for this low action. So once we move past this middle point of the G, and as long as we free up those bends, I'll be happy, and then I'll be concentrating on what I call the fret slap, which is usually associated with the lower strings. Okay, so here we are now attacking the area on this fingerboard, fretboard, that is causing the slight choke outs when we're bending from this very low 1.2 millimeter action. So I'm kind of expecting, and rightly so, I'll show you where the low spot is. So this is actually a low spot. It wasn't on the outside E track, but it certainly is here. So if you can see, we have cutting, it's not that easy to see, but it's cutting quite heavily on this fret here. Think about the middle section, cutting, suddenly it isn't cutting. These, none, tiny bit, but none, and none whatsoever. See that? None and none, tiny bit, but not on the G. So it's bending into here. It is it's a dip. So as we bend up, it's falling into a dip, and it's choking out or buzzing out on the subsequent fret, which isn't technically and in and of itself relatively high, or sorry, it's not empirically high, but the ditch, that little pit where those untouched frets are, that makes the next fret effectively high. So it means to free up this bend so it doesn't choke at this chosen action, I have to level down the ordinary frets to even out, or average out, if you like, down to part the way down to where the little trough is. So 14. So it's now not quite not quite choking dead, which it was before. So we've got those 12 bend, 13 bend, 14 bend is 14 bend is still, it's better, but it isn't quite there yet. So what it just tells me, and this is the bit that comes with experience, it tells me I need to keep working on that end very gently, and we are basically bringing down the high frets, or the effect of the frets that are relatively high either side of this low terrain, and once we've done that, we should free up that note. Now it's not the end of the world, it's not a ton of fret metal, but it's important that we have to recognize that that's the only way we're going to free up those bent notes at that chosen action. If we don't want to spend the fret metal, or we're nervous about it, then the only thing you can do is compromise by raising the playing action, and you only have to raise it a tiny amount. It might even prove to be barely perceptible. So 14 is working. 14 was the worst, so 15's nearly perfect. 14 is doable. 13 and 12 both improved. I'll do a tiny bit more to give a tiny bit more leeway on that 14th fret bend, but after that I'm going to move on, and you can hear, that's the great thing about this method, you actually hear the change, and so we know that we've freed that bend up at this chosen action. So, some people might rail at that and say, well, why are you going that low, and what's the point, and only stupid people want low actions and whatever. That's fine. Their preferences, and it's like that whole thing again. If it doesn't suit you, don't bother being critical of other people if that's their preference, right? But because I know that it happens to be the preference of my customers, and that's, again, by the way, what the pre-qualification thing is, that when people watch my videos, they know that the customers I'm doing the work for have asked for a very low action, so they know that's what I'm doing, and they know that this leveling method is a lot about that. So, my customers prefer that, and so for them it does mean they are trusting me to make a good call on spending a small amount of fret metal in particular places in order to reach working bends at the chosen low action. And we wouldn't have to do any of this if people wanted to play with the really high action that it might have come out the factory with. But as well as I do, when we started playing guitar, we didn't want bleeding high action. We criticised, we moaned and whinged about why guitars came with these really high playing actions, and why couldn't you lower them without running into buzz, and so on and so forth. We weren't happy. We wanted better, and some of us persevered and played anyway, carried on playing anyway, even with our terrible actions, and some learned later on how to change it. So you can see that I don't need to spend too much time on this D, the D, yeah. But now I'm going to spend more time on the A and the E, because they're the ones that tend to rattle a little bit, or slap as I call it. But it shouldn't be too much trouble. Now the calibration of the tool is good. People ask me, somebody asked me today actually, oh, I learned this method off you a long time ago, but I see you're using a different tool. What is that thing? And that thing is still just a truss rod. It's called a U-channel truss rod, and it does the same thing as the truss rod that I showed how to make in my ebook. It just is a little bit stiffer, and over the years I've come to find that the slightly stiffer truss rod works better for this part of the process, particularly actually the getting rid of the fret slap on the lower strings. You can probably see the dust here where the high spots are on this side of the neck radius. But yes, it works better on this on these strings, that thicker, or not thicker, stiffer rod. Tiny little bit of rattle or fret slap there, but it's really is small. So I'm just going to do a whiff more, if I can get this thing to stay in place. Thank you. A tiny whiff more down here. Yeah, so this is called a U-channel truss rod, and Hosco in Japan makes it one like this, and I actually bought this one from StewMac in the States because it was the only place I could see it being sold at the time, and I thought it was a good idea to give it a try. So I bought it from them. But it's you can get it fairly commonly. It's also known as a Martin truss rod. Now you hear this fret slap here. Fret slap is where every single note almost, or at least great chunks of the notes on the neck, seem to have this accompanying rattle, which I call slap. And the great thing now is, if you imagine it as a series of little hills and valleys interfering with the smooth progression of the strings as they spin, it's an imperfect curve, and this by comparison is a more perfect curve, because it's a curve approximated from 3 sample points of this natural curve, or the irregular curve that we've got in front of us. And because it's more simplified and smoother, it lays on top of the bumpy curve, the lumpy curve, imperfect curve, and it seems to just about clip off some of the hills, the peaks of the hills along this imperfect curve, in such a way that we get a little bit more room for the strings. So it's a little bit much there, higher there, we're definitely still low there, but at this state we're not bending into that track, so it's not really a critical issue. What I'm interested in now is listening out for reducing the amount of slap. Better in the first half. From about 8 we've got more, and 12 onwards. So again, what I'll do is I'll take this off and I will place this down here, and I'm now going to concentrate on this half really. And when I say concentrate, I'm doing all of it, but I'm pressing down a little bit on this half. That's a little bit of gravity assist. So I'm just kind of paying more attention and trying to impose a little bit harder the smooth curve of this rod onto the E track. So it's a little bit more effort, and it'll kick up some more dust, he said in his best Apollo 11 speak. Okay. Don't worry about the tuning. That's better. It's still not totally perfect, so I'm just going to make a double check, a reality check of what the height is around here. And actually, yeah, this is different from the one at home. Don't trust these meters, period. Anyway, let's go with the one I've got here, because it does feel quite low. We want to be at 1.5 here, and this is actually a little bit underneath that, so this, how strange, why is that? Don't tell me. Mexico. Do you know what, I put a thing in there earlier on thinking it was the American sized one, and it's not, it's the metric-y one. How strange. Was it this guitar I was doing earlier on? Okay, so what we're looking for here is a 1.5 action on the last fret, so that is a tiny bit low, and we want 1.5 here, and that's not quite so low, but still needs a little tweak. Okay, that's a little bit low, only a tiny bit. Yeah, we're getting there. Wow, this is really running at about 1 millimeter, so that's super low, but if she'll play, we'll play. I've already done the intonation at home. That's naughty of me, isn't it? Anyway, looking across at the spread, I'm happy with that. And it's almost totally now, with a little tiny lift, it's now almost totally slap free. But I'm going to do a little tiny bit more now on the 12-13 area. And then we'll call that done and dusted. 789, tiny bit on 789, and then we'll stop. Okay. I've been reading oh blimey, The World of Yesterday by Stefan Zweig, Austrian writer, Austrian Jewish writer, from born in the tail end of the 19th century and lived through the First and Second World Wars. So it's an incredibly interesting tale, but it's the relevance for today. There's so many weird echoes, you know, because he's talking a lot about the delusion that countries allowed themselves, the self-delusion that European countries allowed themselves in the space between the First and the Second World War, up to and including the little Austrian colonel stroke painter, failed painter, you know, his rise to power, who we shall not name, probably because of YouTube's freaky algorithms. But anyway, yeah, so he's talking about how that tyranny sort of, and control and you know, all of that sort of the gradual drift into totalitarian control, how it happens, and how people of all types sort of persuade themselves, oh, it won't be for long, or it won't last, or they won't survive this, or, you know, that movement will be over by next summer. You know, nobody's gonna, gosh, the whole of Germany won't sign up for that nonsense. Goodness gracious, you know, and everybody's being totally reasonable, and including himself, you know, and he's very honest about being one of those people who didn't see it coming and didn't recognize it at all when you know, by now with hindsight we can't believe that people hadn't noticed things or spotted the worrying signs, but they didn't, and so he found himself having to, as an Austrian Jew, it was only a matter of time, although he perhaps didn't know it then, but we know with hindsight it was only a matter of time before his books would be banned and prescribed, and he would not find a publisher willing to publish his work and so on, and things would get very bad. And eventually, of course, had he stayed in the greater German Reich, he would have been carted off somewhere extremely unpleasant, as we know, in an attempt to rid Europe of his kind of people. And what I'm going to do now, before I do the recrowning, is I'm going to put on masking tape. Now, I'm going to, again, try and do this with as little overhang as possible so that we get as little chance of finish coming off. But the downside about this Mexican fretting style, along with the Mexican, there were some batches in history that didn't have very good adhesion, and those as soon as you, well, not as soon as you, but they sometimes decided to come off at the touch of the masking tape. So we don't have much control over it, but we have to do this if we're going to polish these frets up in any practical way. Anyway, yeah, so he's Stefan Zweig is talking about in this book, it's an autobiography, and he's detailing that process where in the aftermath of the First World War, he's become a successful writer, and you know, he can go anywhere. He's welcomed in a sort of community of writers anywhere in the world, and he's also, it's interesting because he describes how the writers like him, I'm not sure how aware of this he is, but he talks about how the writers like him all feel that their subject, or the thing that they should be focusing on in their work, is anything but politics. So they all see themselves as apolitical, and for me that rang some alarm bells. Like you know, it's one of the biggest reasons why we're heading for trouble, and Russia is already in a lot of trouble, is because the certain dictators have very successfully depoliticized their populations, so that nobody trusts politics anymore, and nobody has anything to do with it, and therefore nobody exercises the political power that the mass has. And in a way, Stefan Zweig, although he and his fellow writers sort of explained it to themselves as a noble ideal, you know, that they're above such earthly issues, really they're as responsible as opting out of the grime and the importance of politics, and in doing so, as anyone else, and in doing so they played their part in creating the conditions, or playing into the hands of certain Austrian corporals, and all the bad things that came. So that's interesting for me to see that, thinking about the current times we're in, and this importance of this deliberate process of depoliticization that Mr. Vladimir Vladimirovich has embarked on as a deliberate, a willful strategy over the last 20 years. And of course, leading him to a position now where he can commit the most impossible things that people you know will continue to say, you know, how come, given the number of people who are being killed in, you know, the field of Ukraine, you know, how come nobody does anything? And it's because everybody is depoliticized. They've traded out their relationship with decision making to this person, so they can get on with earning money and drinking, or whatever it is they prefer to do. And it's just quite chilling to see a precursor of that, or an earlier version in Stefan Zweig's writing. So I've just got near the end of the book, because his autobiography was written it was written in 1942. So I will have to find out what happens. Of course, I know what happened in the world, as we all do, but to find out what happened to him after that, I don't know much about him, so I shall go and find out by doing some research. But there are so many scary parallels to our times, and the idea that we seem to, well, actually what we've lost is anyone bothered now with learning from history. It seems like the sort of genuine academic studies of history are, I don't know, gone. I mean, you know, the idea of there being a dependable version of history to learn from seems to have been done away with in this kind of destabilization thing, that everybody's lying and everything is fake news, and Funny enough, I remember the start of all of this thing where because there are some people now really querying this, what have we done with this destabilization of any faith or confidence or any faith in the idea of facts, and there are some thinkers now asking about that, and I remember when I did fine art, I was always a sort of doer and maker, and I used to do other corporate-y work alongside doing art and stuff, creative stuff. But when I went to art college in the early 90s as a mature student, or very immature mature student, but one of the things that around that time, it was the birth of multimedia, in inverted commas, that new thing with the Mac computer, and the idea, the thing that really kind of lit up the world for artists was this idea of hypertext, or the World Wide Web, as it was just beginning. But what really turned the artists on was this idea that you had kind of multiple narratives about any one thing, and so this idea of alternate, there not being any one single version of the truth anymore, became a really sexy art school topic. And of course all the grown-ups, the book writing philosophers in the art world, the top ranked theorists, art theorists and so on and so forth, the philosophers, they all jumped onto this whole multimedia thing, and the hypertext, and the loss of, or the death of the single monolithic truth, and now everything has sort of open for claims of multiple authorship and so on. So anyway, this idea about killing off the traditional reassuring idea of truth was, like I say, it was just this sort of I don't know how to put it without being crude. It was just this idea of, it's just what a load of academics got off on. It was very, very titillating and thrilling for them, and every lecture was about it. And the balance of power. If the monolithic truth is no longer blah, 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 what happens to reality and truth? And now we're all authors of it, and reality falls down, and blah blah. And it was all very exciting. And all along that time, I remember thinking, "Oh yeah, okay, that's very sexy and stuff. But what about all the things that depend on, that we've enjoyed, that depend on the stability of a truth? Because the whole thing was, ordinary people now have as much publishing power as the magnates of the old days. So it's a democratization of meaning, and suddenly you can." Your blog or your whatever, your multimedia thing now can speak to millions of people, and you're on a par with the New York Times, and suddenly you have a version of the truth that it's as credible as theirs, and the whole art movement and the philosophical movement at the time just seemed hell bent on trashing any notion of an agreed reality. Or a negotiated reality that was based on, the gravitas of a learned institution. All those things that, the whole of quote-unquote progress of the Enlightenment was increasingly based on. All that stuff, the fact that if something was in an encyclopedia, it was there because it was tested and counter-tested and stood the test of all those tests, the test of time, and it remained there because it had solidity, and for it to appear in an encyclopedia that took all of this effort and human labour to produce and to print and so on and so forth, all of that contributed to a way of living that agreed on the need for a version of truth upon which sailing ships could set out and find their way back, or airplanes can take off and definitely become lighter than air thanks to the thing we call science and physics and mechanics and so on. And then came all this postmodern stuff about the hypertext and the loss of truth and all of that stuff. And now we've gone through all of that era, which has blossomed into the fake news era and the complete pulling back from any engagement with politics, because it's all too confusing and they're all lying. Now when Newsnight, to be impartial, or BBC, to be impartial, brings on a conspiracy theorist blogger who has millions of hits and gives that person's view equal weight to somebody who works for an established and respected, news institution or whatever, because the BBC or whoever is deciding on this superficial interpretation of equality of balance, shall we say, that you just give each of them the same 15 seconds, where in fact the truth is that the nutcase in their room with all their conspiracy theories doesn't deserve the same 15 seconds that somebody who's studied and done a whole load of research and has practiced in the area for decades, and has earned the respect of their peers and so on, because that's all now been done away with. So it's a really, I think we're starting to see the effects of this headlong rush into the chucking off of the shackles of patriarchal meaning, meaning as written by the victors and the white scientists and all the things that we find distasteful in the modern age, but which happen to also provide a stable platform for so many of the things we enjoyed. And now we're starting to see, I think we're starting to see that nothing actually works once we've chucked all of that away and now abandoned, and that people now don't vote at all because they've finally decided. I keep hearing this on the TV and the radio and online. People interviewed about their voting, and they've just given up. They're not going to vote at all because they're all the same as each other. There's no difference between them. Therefore, I'm not going to engage. And it's that disengagement that's the terrible thing. Because I guess there's one thing that you can be sure of, is that if everybody disengages, somebody else is going to set the agenda, aren't they? If you aren't vying for a seat at the table, then somebody with the hunger for doing so will do it if you're not, if you don't want to have a part in it. And Putin's been very clever in that he's made that an almost explicit deal with the Russian population, which is effectively to say, I'll stop meddling. I won't meddle in your private business, your affairs, your home life, providing you don't meddle in politics and just leave it to us. We'll take care of it, and we'll make sure there's running water and jobs to be done and salaries to be paid, but you don't get seriously involved in the business of politics or trying to change anything. That's our job. And it seems that they've gone for that, and that's why, one of the biggest reasons why the things that are being tolerated in that country, and people say, why? How on earth is that being allowed? How come somebody, they can't even go and hold a piece of paper up in a town square without being carted off? How can anybody permit that? And when you depoliticize people, you make them apolitical, then one thing you definitely do with them is you atomize them, and I think they no longer have even the ballot box sense that you can get of of you as a big group of people, and they don't gather because they're not allowed, so they don't get the physical sense of being a powerful group of people who could, just a fraction of the mobilized men could rearrange politics in Russia, but they don't. And the same here. Although I'm starting to beginning to think that we might see more of that bodily kind of mass representation, which may not be such a bad thing. It may not be pleasant or pretty either, but if it doesn't happen, we just drift into the hands of whoever has the most to gain. And I think that's my concern. I think that's sort of where our public life and politics are currently on the way, in that direction. So anyway, that just went off on a tangent as always, but kind of a lot of that's been brought to mind by reading, or brought into focus again by reading Stefan Zweig. And I don't know if it's sort of slightly depressing thought that, oh my God, in third time in, what are we talking, 1914, third time in 110, 120 years max, something like that, we're in danger of being in another world war. Because we just cannot learn. But then, that book, he's reflecting on how they didn't learn from the First World War, the war that was supposed to end all wars, and, rather than looking back from today, he's writing at that point, from a position part the way down the well shaft again. He's still effectively tumbling as he writes it. It's only 1942 and the worst is yet to come. And so his book is partly the sort of the shock of realizing that we learned nothing and we repeated the same thing. And so I'm reading it at a time where I'm feeling the same, only just before it goes completely wrong. Well, I suppose not that dissimilar to him, apart from all his literary success, etc., etc. But anyway, so that's what goes through my mind these days. I'm not able to just, anesthetize myself and potter on and consume, and that's partly because doing this I'm not very covered up or wrapped up in consuming, because we don't really have a lot of disposable money for consuming. So, and we don't drink or smoke or do illegal drugs. So I once did all three, and not at the same time. Well, I probably did all at the same time, but and so we don't have a place to forget regularly or easily. So hence I'm sitting here doing guitars, but I'm always kind of concerned, or I am concerned about where we are. I'm astonished still that Britain, most people in Britain are not hearing the words of VV Putin, who has made it completely clear with no ambiguity that it's going to be Ukraine, and then it will be NATO and Europe. There's no doubt at all. And yet in Britain we're carrying on at a public level. The general public is carrying on as if this just isn't happening. And I find that, I suppose, understandable, but extremely worrying. You know, there are people who spend a lot of time dealing with this or thinking about it are saying things like, you know, things that sound ridiculous to ordinary people. They're saying, hey, we need to be bringing in a national service, a draft, immediately, because we will be at war in 2026. I mean, that just sounds unbelievable to everybody I know and speak to. And if you, a bit like Russia, if you introduced a draft, and like Ukraine, a huge chunk of people would try and run away from it. So we have this situation where, maybe good or bad, I don't know, but a very large section of people are not prepared to fight to resist an attacker. And it's funny, in Ukraine's case, they're struggling to find enough people, because even though people can see that the Russians are knocking, well, they're already in the territory and they're heading for all of it if they can get it. Even though young people can see that, they're running. They're running and leaving, hiding, moving, instead of responding to the need for more troops. And listen, I don't know if I would have the courage to stay, or whether I'd run for an island in the middle of anywhere where nobody would ever see me again. You know, I probably would be hugely tempted to do that, but you know, can you do that when you know that this terrible thing is coming for the helpless people? You know, your kids, maybe your grandchildren. Can you leave them to that? Blimey, who knows? You know, I was as a young idealistic man, I seem to remember feeling like I was very anti-war, pacifist. I don't know really whether I was that or naive, and I'm sort of interested in reading the Stefan Zweig book, whether, you know, he talks about thinking, he describes himself as being, his sense of himself as, I would be useless to to an army. I am not that, I don't have that kind of blah blah blah, you know. So what I'll do is I will use my talents as a writer to blah blah blah, you know. And I sort of, on one level, I get it, you know. We'd all bring our best skills, you know, contribute the best skills, and of course there must be writers and propagandists and so on, communicators, but God, I found myself wondering if Stefan Zweig later, privately, after having written that in his autobiography, whether he privately agonized over a question of whether he was suffering from cowardice or the fear of taking a stand to protect his country, and if not his country, his immediate family, or if not his family, then the principles and the standards and the values that had given him his life and that he cared about. And of course it's an absolutely horrible question that none of us ever wishes to have to ask of ourselves. And of course there he is in this part of the book I'm reading now, sitting in London, safely away from Austria, and running up to 1942, where the book presumably ends. And he must be, some part of him, I'm sure, must have been having that conversation and possibly not liking what he finds, or hiding from himself any darker thoughts about whether he's doing the right thing, or whether his actions are driven by nothing but fear. And don't get me wrong, I'm not mocking fear. I've felt some of that fear for the last 2 years, or 2.5 years. This has been going on 2 years and 2 months. And after a while, you sort of sometimes you sometimes get to think you're sick of fear for its own sake, and almost start to feel like it would be better to stand for something and confront fear than to run and not stand for anything, and run because the fear was too great. And that's again a luxury, I guess, from my perspective, to not have to do that right now. But I think I would hope that if it turned out that those same people were coming across our hedgerows and lanes in a few years, 2 or 3 years' time, let's say, I would hope that I would be able to overcome my fear enough to attempt to take a stand and hold that off. But I don't underplay how terrifying it is. And then people, I guess that's what Stefan Zweig in this book is describing, is how the fear of that is just so horrible, and it's so impossible to admit or to face that could be happening again, or what appears to be happening in 1942 is going to get even worse, because by then, of course, it's happened. It's the world was in the Second World War, but in the lead up to that, everybody seemed to collude together, because it's just too awful to imagine that it would come back to that after all that humanity had been through and so on. And the tragedy is that kind of colluding together to not look at it never made it actually go away. And a strong argument would be that, in fact, it guaranteed its inevitability, probably. And I have a horrible sort of feeling that's where we are at the moment. And I think one of the things I think about life in general is that as a species, and as many of our modern societies, we seem, and countries, nationalities, individual ones better or worse at it, but human beings seem to be terrible at seeing a problem, potential problem, and making sacrifices, even just hard work or whatever required to prevent them, to head them off. We seem to be doomed to only being any good when it's gone wrong, and then oh look, we're all backs against the wall as a nation, but also as a species. We're all Independence Day when the aliens are coming, or oh look, it's a meteorite, deep impact or whatever. We're all working together. with a bit of intrigue and Machiavellian stuff still thrown in to make the story interesting. But yeah, we don't seem to be very good in the long-term vision stuff, I would say, which is a mighty shame, because as a result, well, you get what I'm saying. I think you understand where I think it's going to end up. Now, I'm going to. Oh, I was going to. By the way, I was originally going to sand back these edges, but just like on the Strat, they are filled fret ends, and what's happened to them is that over time several things, the wood has shrunk very slightly and the ends of the fills are sticking out very slightly, but as well as that, the little bit of fill is sticking out so you can feel it, but it's underneath a little cover of poly. So if I were to sand it back for smoothness, we would lose that edge of poly, and it would require some time-consuming touch-ups. You'd have to redo it, the whole edge. So it's the sort of job that's better left until there's a refret on the horizon. But that's part of where it can get taken care of. Now I've got another one the wrong size. How come this? Where have I put the one I need? I'm going mad. I keep looking for the right thing to do this thing, and then when I find it, I must put it somewhere and it gets lost. So I'm looking for the right size socket, which is now gone. I keep one of these handy. Has that got anything to do with it? I even, this is the one I sanded back, but it's wrong size for this. So that fits a different one, but not this one. Oh, blimey. Okay. You'll have heard me, or if you watch my videos, you'll have seen me do this thing that I'm about to do the other day, and it involves tipping all the blasted sockets out in order to find the one that fits that. So there must be a series of different size nut which is driving me mad. Let me just hang this up for a second. No, it's not that one in there. This is for the tailor. Let me just check it's not. I keep one in here for the tailor bolts. And I'm certain that is not going to be the right one, but let me just make sure it isn't. No, that isn't one. That is for the GS Mini neck bolts, but this therefore means we have to find another one to do this. And as you can imagine, I have to find the damn things, which could take a while, and I need this thing here, which could take far too much time. So talk amongst yourselves about conspiracy theories. Okay, that will do. That is a 13mm. I did have a 13mm out before. I'm going to keep it out. Is that the right size for that? No, it doesn't work. I need a 30. So that one's an 11. I need a 13mm in the bigger step down socket. Otherwise my tool won't work. Hello, anyone? Right, I'm going to try and dig this out. What's this? No. 3 9/64. 12mm. That's the right size, but it's the wrong size thing. This one's 13mm, but with the wrong size thing. Will this 12 work? No, it's going to be 13. Nope, small. This is the problem. We're going to end up with the right socket but with the wrong fitment, because if it's a small fitment I can't get it in there. That's too big. So that's the right size, and that's 14. Oh, too big, won't even fit in there. So we want 13 of this style, please. No, God. 13 of that style. I think we're going to draw a blank. 16. Hellfire. 9/14. 11. What's this? 9/16. Right, fitting, wrong size. What's this? 12. Right, fitting. Still the wrong size. If only we could get longer one of that size. Now that isn't it up there, is it? No, it's the wrong size fitment. So, what's this one? Something and a half. Ooh, we could probably get that one to work. Right, let's keep that one out. Let's just make sure there isn't actually the right one. Nope, there isn't the right one in there. Okay, and that one is 14, that's too big. So we're going for an imperial one that will hold it, judging by this. Being American, Mexican is probably the correct thing anyway, but I have little or no choice in the matter right now. So let's just... Now, do we have enough room? Is this long enough? That's the other... God. And we may not, we may just manage it. This tool on top of that, inside. Let's try it. It's not going to work. Tarnations. I need to go, this needs to go further down than that. Holy cow. So well, not perfect. I would rather have held it, but it's actually tightened it up. So sorry about that. Let me get these sockets out of the way and we'll come back to where we were. So that's 11. We'll keep that out because that's ready cut for another thing. We'll stick that on there like so. And we'll keep this one out next to it as a possible for future reference. Stick it next to it. Right. And this belongs up there as well. Let's get these back out of the way. Sorry about that detour. 214 shims. Oh yeah, that's true. We need to take some of those home, don't we? 214s, 414s. GS Minis. What we got here? 214s, GS Minis. What's this in here? Taylor Baby. 414s, no, 214s. Right, we'll take those home. We could use those for pre-setting up the. Sorry, I'm just running ahead of myself. Now, what I want to do now is I want to just quickly clean the ends of my fingers because we're ready to restring. The lazy man's way of cleaning his hands. Cellulose thinners. Gets the grime off very quickly. So here we are. Nut done. Leveling done. Saddles checked, working. Let's get some 10 gauge strings on it. And think about something other than the state of the world. Well, what else is there? There isn't just guitars, is there? Are there? There are other things. Anyway. So my kind of hopes then for this year with finding, that my landlord has passed away. My hopes are for some continuity of residence here. I would really like that. Obviously, I would prefer that also without a sudden increase in rent. But all told, I guess if things have to change and, if Roger's wife would be entirely understandable if she wanted to sell the business and I don't know, go cruising around the world while she still has a chance, I would not begrudge her that at all. So I guess I need to be mentally in the space of looking for or being ready for a change. Realistically, I think way back when I had to find a place in the first place, if you get what I mean, I sort of said to myself, look, at the worst comes to the worst, I could do basic setups in the shed without doing any more videos or building, so I couldn't do any routing work and stuff like that. So there was that, you know, rather than starve to death, I could do absolute straightforward setups in that place. So I have to kind of retain that in my mind as a possibility. We have that space and it could still be doing that. And some people do great work in their spare rooms, and you know, I could do the same if the shed was impossible to conceive of doing work there. Why is this not pushing back? Come on, please go through. Yeah, so I have to kind of just keep a realistic eye. So for some reason this doesn't want to go through. That's because this is way forward of the point where the string comes through. Now it still doesn't want to come through. Holy cow. Sometimes you catch this. There you go. Yeah, so I guess I've got to be realistic and not completely panic stricken. Now, for some reason now this is now kicked up at the back and it doesn't want to come through. This is really somewhat annoying. Right. Okay, so let's get this on. I know somebody who'd be pleased if I was working back at home, and that would be Morris. Bless him. He would. He's missed all these last couple of years. He's missed coming in and checking out work in progress. So when it comes to putting on the strings, I follow the pulling it all the way through, straight through the saddle, make sure it's up in the block, and then I grab the string at the first fret and pull it back one fret, and then I realise I haven't got my screwdriver, which I was charging. So that should be ready now, and there's no reason doing more work than is absolutely necessary. Okay, so we'll do that again, pull it through, make sure it's up, the ball is inside the block, pull it back a fret's worth and start winding, and then I hold the string over the loose string first time round, and then under the loose string the second time round, and then into its slot, and you get a little wind or two windings with the cut end coming out in between them, which is a neat little tidy way of doing it, and it just limits the amount of it puts a useful minimum of wire around the post, so it's not storing up too much slack. Yeah, so yeah, Morris would be thrilled, but as some of you probably remember from the bad old days, my neighbours were unhappy with me doing guitar stuff in the shed, and to be fair, you know, some of that work every week there was some noisy work, and you know, it must have been not great for them, and I respect that, which was why when it came to a head it was the right thing, you know, I kind of accepted it was, I had to go and find somewhere else, hence this place, but you know, as an absolute push, if I can't find somewhere else immediately, if I got notice to move, then I would have to continue doing setups at home somehow and would make it work one way or another. But probably it might be the end of the videos of setups. To be fair, there's probably enough on YouTube now to keep things ticking over for a long time, but of course the beauty of the setup was part of the attraction was that it lets customers see the work I've done on their guitar, which, you know, is a priceless thing in some ways. I know people really like to see it. Now that's gone round a little bit more of a wrap than I'd want, but that's not so bad. Okay, now we're on the last two strings. So after this we will, I know that I've done the intonation already, so I don't really need to do it, but it's nearly there, and I just tweaked it a little bit. Again, by the time you get to the thin plain strings, that 1 fret's worth turns into more than 2 whines, just maybe 3 or so, but it's probably better that the plain ones have that little bit extra, because they have a sort of tendency to slip if you don't do enough, so it's better to have a little bit extra. I mean, one thing, if I had to move, you know, one of the pluses in it, although I don't see it as a plus right now, but I'm just talking it through as a plus to kind of get me mentally in the zone, man. One of the pluses about it would be, you know, a sort of push to find or set up a more spray friendly or a better spraying facility, so I could actually do some good quality, you know, full-on finishes, which at the moment I'm sort of restricted to waiting for the right weather and then only really being able to confidently do satin finishes, for example, because, you know, to do really good gloss stuff you do need a dust-free environment controlled type of space. So, you know, if I had to start looking again, I'd certainly be keeping that, you know, at the forefront. You know, as in, if I have to move, you know, let me look and see if I can improve the spray ability, you know, my ability to spray. So I think that would be a good way of, instead of just looking for somewhere identical, you know, aim for better. If I have to move, like a hermit crab, if I've got to move, find a better shell, not just a same sized one that offers the same as I had before. No, I'm a modern hermit crab. I want a plastic shell from a thrown away, I don't know, Costa coffee frappuccino type thing. It's tragic, isn't it, when you watch those little tropical hermit crabs taking up residence in sort of tops of sun lotion. Okay, so I'm just going to do. I'm going to do a bit more stretching, but let me just double check where we are on action right now. So we are kind of we're a bit just under 1.5 there. We're just about the same there. Coming just under it towards 1.25, just onto 1.25, just under 1.25, just below 1.25. So I'm happy with where that action is. I want to do one more stretching, get it all stretched out. One of the things about having a low action set is the lower an action you have, the more subject you are, or the more vulnerable you are to changes in the environment. So if you know the weather changes, humidity, temperature, whatever, and your neck changes shape very slightly, a low action will pay you back quickly by, you know, if the neck changes shape or flattens out, for example, you're quite quickly likely to get buzz creeping back in. The good side of that is that if it changes shape when the climate causes it to change shape, all you have to do is adjust the truss rod. And with a tiny tweak of the truss rod, you should be back where we were. That high E is detuning a bit more than the others at the moment. I don't know why. Okay, this will be the last stretch as I do. Just looking at my list of things: chokes on bends, fret wear. Thinking about if we had a potentially faulty one of those, which hasn't proven to be faulty, and we were looking at replacing, if we had to, going for a paired compensated brass saddles and an ashtray bridge, but we haven't had to do that. Okay, we're good. Have I got too low? I must have gone too low. My technique more than anything. My fingers struggle to bend that far on tens, but that's actually, to be fair, that is lower than 1. So we've gone down a little bit. It's very easy to do while you're working on the guitar with the strings off. These grub screws move, and so that tiny bit of clearance we had, we have back. So a combination of needing to actually be able to press it down and a slight movement in the saddles. So we really don't want to move any more, or we don't want the strings off anymore because the saddles will move. Okay. There we are. We're done. 1.1 down there-ish. What can we even say it's that? It's about, actually it's about 1.2. Really hard to see any difference. 1.1, 1.2. And then down this side we've got a little below 1.5. It's hard to see exactly. Just a little below 1.5. Okay, dokie, there we have it. Thank you for watching. Replaced that, tightened up that. Strap buttons are good, all over cleaned. Replaced the thingy with a tusk thingy. We will stick that to there. Those original parts can go back. We didn't change the nut on this one because Jonathan requested keeping the original. So that's it. We're done. Everything done. Pratt leveled. Slot slightly widened. The complete choke outs got rid of. If you've got the strength to bend that far, my soft little fingers are resisting it. And we got away without any damage to the poly as well, which is good. So, and these are okay. There's no flaw in this. It seems to be working. The saddles all seem to be working fine. So that's good. Thank you for watching. See you again soon.